Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I am joined this week by all of my awesome co-hosts, plus a guest.
Nate Heininger.
Shane Kelly.
And Lauren Ash.
And this week we are joined by a very exciting guest on the show, Eli Hodapp. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. I love, I've been doing the TouchArcade show for, God, we're at like episode number like 404 or something like that now. So it's always exciting to be on like other people's podcasts where I don't have to do any work other than show up.
I know.
That's the podcast dream.
That's how we do it too.
Sad but true. So Eli has been a fixture in the iOS games community for basically as long as that's been a thing. I've been reading your work on TouchArcade, and we've been talking about GameClub on this podcast pretty much since, in the margins of this podcast, ever since I heard about it, and I'm very excited about it. So I really was looking forward to getting Eli on the show to talk a little bit about GameClub and what it is and, what it looks like from the inside and just what it means for iOS gaming.
Yeah, you guys picked it up really early. It was kind of surprising. Like we were still sort of trying to figure out like what the reception was going to be to the announcement and like all this stuff. And then it was like, oh, hey, we're on a podcast. That's cool.
You can blame me about that. I saw your announcement on TouchArcade, and I've been super hyped for iOS gaming because that was when I was briefly working in game development, and that corresponded with early iOS gaming. So I played everything trying to learn about the new medium. So when I found out this stuff was coming back, I could not wait to talk about it. So I'm thrilled it exists.
Yeah, and the problem of iOS games, important iOS games dropping off of the App Store is one that we've talked about a zillion times because it just always seems to come up on our show. There's all of these iOS and Apple platforms are really important to all of us, and it just comes up all the time. Just last episode, we were just talking about the Apple Design Awards, and we cover those every year. And so we follow iOS games pretty closely, and GameClub is the first kind of breath of hope, I think, that I have seen with regards to the problem of iOS games kind of disappearing. So I don't know. Before we dig in too much into talking specifically about GameClub, I know we mentioned you've been with TouchArcade for a long time, but like for folks who may not be familiar with your work over at TouchArcade or maybe haven't listened to the TouchArcade podcast or read TouchArcade, could you just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to joining GameClub?
Yeah, sure. So do you want the genesis of how I joined TouchArcade? Or just what I've been doing?
Sure.
All right, so
I don't know that story.
Well, it's kind of funny. Like, so I, in high school, I joined Mac Rumors in like 2000 or something like that. And, being a teenager that was really into causing trouble on the internet, like most teenagers on the internet, I decided I would post on the Mac Rumors forums as if I were a hardcore Windows user as like my online persona, right? Which of course got me banned pretty quickly.
I probably hated you around that same time.
And so that was in the days of AOL Instant Messenger, right? So
right.
I was able to look up like the guy who runs Mac Rumors and like start pestering him on AOL Instant Messenger, like complaining that I was banned. I can't believe that he doesn't want me to like, talk about Microsoft and how great Windows is on his forums and all that stuff. So that's where I met Arnold Kim. And then I had unrelated various like tech day jobs and stuff like that for a few years after that. And then TouchArcade launched right around the time that the iPhone was just kind of like people were just starting to talk about third-party software development on the iPhone. Like that was when the very earliest like jailbreaks were coming out. Remember like Apple released the iPhone and then had like that weird response where they were like, oh, just make web apps for it if you want like games or applications or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
a sweet
these guys,
solution.
Yeah, an amazing solution. So these guys launched TouchArcade, and I knew like everyone from like way back when I was trolling the Mac Rumors forums and became like super passionate about mobile devices just in general. Like I was always the idiot at work that had like the new Pocket PC phone or like the new Palm Trio or like whatever. So when the iPhone came out, I was like, oh man, this is it. Like this thing is really cool, and I want to do something involving this. So TouchArcade launched, and I just started following it because, the App Store is kind of a jungle and you didn't really know what to get. And it was kind of cool that someone was trying to curate it, but it was kind of pretty transparent that the people running it like weren't really gamers. They were just kind of like trying to kind of sort of start a new website that separates game coverage off of Mac rumors. So I was able to pull up my old trolley contacts and be like, hey, remember me, the jerk from well, no, I didn't introduce myself like that, but
yeah,
I was just like, hey, I'm super passionate about this. Like, I have a bunch of free time. Like, I really enjoy writing about games. I really am super into mobile technology, and like, I'll just do this for free. I mean, like, I don't care. Like, this is just like a fun outlet for me. And, I have plenty of time. I had a job I didn't really like at the time and all this stuff. So that eventually surprised everyone with TouchArcade, I guess we were all surprised by how the App Store exploded. Because I thought this was just going to be kind of like a little hobby blog that we were doing a couple people, like everyone writing for free and stuff. And then the App Store kind of turned into the App Store that we know today. And it was like, whoa, hey, wait a minute. Like, this is a business now with like people looking to spend money on advertising and like link share dollars coming in and stuff like that. So I was able to make the transition to full-time games writer guy, which was like, it was very hard to explain to my family what I was doing, because I was working in like the medical tech industry before. And they're like, wait, so you left your job where you do all this cool stuff and you're just writing about phone games now? Which, I don't know, it panned out, I guess. But yeah, so eventually I just sort of took over TouchArcade, just being the most active person. And, the other guys stepped back and like let me do what I was good at. And I kind of ran TouchArcade for almost exactly a decade. And through then I saw the rise and fall of basically every trend on the App Store, and travel all over the world, speaking at different events and doing all sorts of unbelievable stuff that I never would have expected when I was trolling the Mac Rumors forum.
That's right. So that's a really fascinating story. And I'm as equally impressed and also concerned by what is ultimately the message of trolling on an online forum led to a prolific career in games journalism.
No, it was kind of funny because like I got invited to speak at my high school a few years ago because they were like reaching out to like alumni who was doing cool stuff, and like my name had popped up somewhere in some Google search or something that they recognized me. And yeah, it was like this talk where I went in and I was like, don't do what I did. Like, there's no way you can make this work. Like, it's the stars aligned. I can't explain it. Just work hard and good things will happen.
Someone out there is like, if I troll enough forums, one of these will lead to a career.
I think the thing is go back in time and troll.
Yeah.
So you've got, I think, this very unique, very personal position of like observing the entire arc of the App Store. And
for sure.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense for you to be involved with GameClub. I guess GameClub, at least partly, comes out of the idea that it's very we've been having this real issue with keeping great iOS games on the store. There's so many important iOS games that have kind of fallen off of the store for one reason or another. And I mean, there's some obvious reasons, but I wonder if you would just tell me why you think it's so much more of a challenge with iOS than it is with any other platform. You see games delisted off of Steam and things every now and then, but it's a huge news story, whereas it's an epidemic on the App Store.
I think there's a number of problems, but I think more than anything else, it has to do with iOS kind of clunkily has been the same platform for a decade, like the same software platform, right, across an unbelievable amount of hardware. And so the expectations that people have on developers to support software that originally sold for very little money with no recurring revenue or anything like that over a decade worth of software and hardware advancements is just kind of unrealistic. I mean, it would be like being mad that you can't play Midtown Madness on the original Xbox with Xbox Live anymore on like Project Scarlet they announced at E3, because like we've seen that level of advancement in mobile technology, and markets change with time. And when you originally sold your game for $1, I mean, like if you went back and like if you got in your time machine and talked to people that were on launch day with the App Store and are like, hey, so what's your plan for 10 years from now when like there's a bunch of different screen sizes you need to support, there's been 13 iterations of iOS and all this stuff, like you'd probably be like, what's iOS? Like, for one, because that wasn't even a thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of problem that I think just has sort of evolved out of a market that no one expected to be as successful or as long lasting as it actually has turned out to be. I guess, I mean, because like if you look at like, so going back even before the iPhone, you had like the BlackBerry and Palm OS and Pocket PC and stuff like that. And like those platforms all also had like their software problems and, things not working and stuff, but like no one really cared because it was hard to get software on them and like the software wasn't that great and everything else. So I think it threw everyone for a loop when the App Store came out and stuff was good.
Yeah, I know the only game that I played on my phone before the App Store was the sort of a dice rolling game that I really enjoyed at the time.
Yeah.
But like
it was like calculator games.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything.
Yeah,
really
I think it's interesting you brought up like Palm Pilots. Like that for me, I had this sort of foundational experience in high school of getting a Palm Pilot and trying to figure out how to get games onto it, and the process to get like a couple of bad old arcade ports onto it would today be laughable.
Right. And the premium software scene in Palm OS was like, spending $20 for like a better calendaring program, like not anything you ever really care about using beyond the scope of its usefulness, which is probably just that individual device, right? Like when you bought like that calendar app for your Palm Pilot, like you weren't expecting it to work in 10 years on like whatever. I mean, you wouldn't care either if it did or not.
Yeah, and things like consoles are they're not a moving target like that. So there's no difficulty in continuing to support one of those because you've already pressed the disc. It just works after that.
Right.
Whereas something like an iPhone, I've often kind of bemoaned that Apple doesn't offer some kind of compatibility mode or something for older software, but it's there's obvious reasons that's never been like on their radar. They're not like a rearward looking bunch of folks.
Right, exactly. Apple especially. Yeah.
So where does kind of GameClub fit into that? Like obviously you guys are bringing back older iOS games in some interesting ways, but like so tell me, I guess maybe start by telling me like how you got involved with these guys.
Well, so I ran into them at I don't even know, like a GDC or got introduced or something like that from like mutual friends. I don't remember how I actually came into contact originally, but it was just like, Eli, these guys are doing something that you're going to be super into. You should just like get a meeting with them or do a phone call or whatever the original meeting was. And they kind of threw me this idea of, hey, what if we could solve premium game monetization on the App Store? And what would that mean for software and gaming and everything else? Like if developers had money to maintain things and create new things without necessarily worrying about monetization and everything else. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds amazing. Like, tell me more. And that kind of sort of evolved into me being like, well, holy cow, like I know so many people that this would be perfect for that I can like just totally loop in and, people that have games that are dead because they can't afford to, can't rationalize updating more than anything else.
Right.
And if we're able to kind of like reboot the financial furnaces, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, on these games, like we'll have what amounts to like a renaissance of premium game development with people coming back to the platform that had just like given up on it. So the dream that the GameClub founders were kind of pitching at the very earliest primordial stages of GameClub when I first kind of heard of it was just like, dude, this is amazing. This is solving a problem I've spent years complaining about, and like, let me know what I can do to help because I'm going to throw my full weight behind, whatever you guys need because it's super cool. Which eventually turned into like, well, we just kind of need you full time doing this because we raised some money and all this other stuff. So that's kind of how I came on board.
I guess I hadn't really considered how valuable your long-term view of games and your connections to all these game developers from the history of iOS would be to this project. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because I was kind of like, inadvertently became like the perfect person to kind of like get the band back together, I guess, because it was like,
yeah,
it was like, I put together I think, I don't remember how long after our initial calls or meetings or whatever, like I put together like my dream list of like games I'd love to see back. And I was like, I looked at it and I was like, man, I know like all these people personally. Like I can just like text half these people, and like a quarter of them I have on Facebook, and like the other quarter I have on Skype. Like this is not going to be a thing to like get people in on this. So
yeah, the outreach is easy. I'm curious how long that list was. Do you remember?
It's probably around like 100 games or so that we that I originally was like, this is everything I would want and more. So,
this is your dream list. Yeah.
Yeah, my dream list. And then we've kind of like added other stuff based on community feedback and other things like that. And like what's been kind of amazing is that even someone like me that's been around mobile for so long, like there's so many mobile games that like I've forgotten so many too.
Yeah.
Like people will request games and I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot about that one. Like, yes, that's amazing. I'm totally going after that.
I mean, when we have conversations among ourselves about the games we are nostalgic for, I'm shocked that there's not more overlap. Given we were all really active in the scene, I think there was just a time period where so much was getting released and so many premium games were coming out that when we're in a relatively fallow period now, since there's so much free to play, it just feels like you look back and you're like, man, I was, feasting a while back. It's almost shocking. We just did our design awards, and nothing against the winners. We're just thinking back against like how much breadth there used to be compared to currently. It's just a lot. There's still plenty of good stuff out there. It's just much harder to find. And there's a lot of free to play stuff gumming up the works.
Yeah, I remember like 2011, 2012 or so was like the heyday of TouchArcade. Like I remember like so many good games were coming out that like we hit this tipping point where it was like we can't even post about all these good games anymore. You know, and it's kind of weird too to be like, to have people request games. It's like, oh, I remember this. Like, let me look up the TouchArcade review, and it's like, oh, one didn't exist because it came out at this time where. And like, I'll look up like what got released that week. And I was like, oh, there was 30 games that were amazing that came out that week. And we were a team of like 5.
Yeah.
So
it's wild.
So you have this huge list of games, and you have your various attachments and connections to each. How did you choose and how have you prioritized which ones are actually worth sort of like your first go, your breakout into the industry, or the ones that are currently being used for beta testing?
I mean, it's hard to kind of quantify that in any way. And that's kind of like a challenge that we're sort of facing internally, is like, how do we put a value on these different games as far as like, what do we prioritize updating? Like, what do we prioritize getting and things like that? Cause honestly, it's just kind of in my gut driving it so far, which like isn't, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. It's probably not the best way to kind of build a content library, but maybe it is. I don't know. It's that's why like the early access stuff has been so informative, of like being able to see like what actually resonates with people and things like that, to kind of be like, oh, okay, I guess we need like more puzzle games and like more role-playing games and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's going to be an evolving thing over time, and like I don't really have the greatest answer right now.
What I'm curious about is more sort of, I mean, obviously this is a really interesting sort of business side of things, just how you're managing to trying to develop a business model to be able to support and sort of resurrect these games, even in the face of the kind of apocalypse of free-to-play BS on the App Store. But I guess underlying that is just a technical challenge of like, how do you take all of these old games and bring them to modern devices, even though obviously you're not going to be like hiring the original developers to come back and work on their projects full time or something. So like, I mean, I'd imagine a lot of these games need a lot of TLC. So like, how is a team of just 5 people doing that? Like, what can you tell me about that approach?
Well, we're 6 now. We just hired one more person, but we have 3 engineers, and the best way I can describe them is just unbelievable God tier intelligent, like just software hackers of the likes that I've just never experienced before in my life. Like, it's like, so they're based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I was actually able to hang out with them and like grab dinner and stuff. And I don't know, like it was a weird experience, because it's like, I'm sure you guys have felt this before in life where you're just like at a table and you're just like, oh my God, everyone here is like 3 times as smart as I am. And I just feel like a complete fucking idiot, like that was kind of like the realization.
Like, we need the idiot because he has connections.
Yeah. So, but it's really just like really good engineers that are willing to kind of like put in the time to figure this stuff out. And we're kind of like building processes at scale too with updating these, because like, so say you're an indie developer that released a game using like Adobe Air or something like that back in 2010 or 11 or whenever Adobe Air was the cool thing that people were using. For you to figure out how to update Adobe Air to 64-bit is like an unbelievable insurmountable task for one game, right? It's an unbelievable amount of work. But where GameClub kind of comes in is we're able to like do one of those games that uses Adobe Air and like thoroughly document the process so that like next time we update an Adobe Air game, it's like, oh, okay, well, we start by doing these 6 things and that gets you most of the way there. Then you do these other 2 things. And then after there, it's just kind of like bug fixing and tweaking and stuff. Whereas figuring all that stuff out is super time consuming the first time you do it and not really worth it if you're not doing it to a bunch of stuff. So that's kind of the
or to something that is like going to sell again, right? Like why do it? Yeah, if you don't know for sure there's a market,
right? Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like a lot of these games that a lot of these guys that we're working with that made these games, like when I hit them up, they're like, "Oh, this is amazing! Like I've just been paying the $99 a year Apple developer fee, like just to keep this online, but I don't make that money back. Like I'm just spending $100 a year, so people don't like feel ripped off because they bought a game from me 7 years ago. So like any hope of making more money than that is like a massive win for a lot of these guys.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I can definitely see there is that weird promise that it didn't seem like such a devil's bargain the first year of sure, I'll keep it up for updates. Right. But as the no one expected the platform to still exist in some incarnation this long. We all assumed it would just kind of get, 2.0'd and everything would kind of get wiped.
Right.
So the expectation that updates would continue ad infinitum, you understand, we've seen plenty of games come and go, just not even just because the 64-bit thing, but just device size has changed. Like so many things has changed that it's almost an impossible demand. I'm really excited to see a way that they can re-release the game without having to piss off the people who paid $1 for it 10 years ago.
I mean, like that's even a thing that like app developers are struggling with now. Like, I don't know if you guys follow Sean, I think his last name is pronounced Heber, the developer of Twitterific on Twitter. Big Zaphod is his Twitter name, but like he's been wrestling with that for a while because like Twitterific is old as dirt now, and like people are still expecting free updates. Like they recently did some big update thing where they added like a maintenance subscription and all this stuff. And like, people are just like flipping out on them. And it's just like, dude, you gave me $3 in 2009. Like, come on, this is, so it's not just games that are facing it, but,
Well, the entire, economic understanding of the App Store has been ruined from, the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Like people would be, like, oh, I'm not paying $1 for that. And then they walk over to the vending machine, pay $1.50 for a Coke.
Yeah.
Like, that was worth my money, but $1 for an app or whatever. And I can, we did Rolando a couple episodes ago, and I definitely remember being like, $10 for a game on my phone? Get out of here. Like, hell no, never going to do that. So we've always had this really skewed perception of the value of things on iPhone and whether it's worth our money.
It's tricky because like, I never really know like who you can really like point the finger at for that sort of thing, because like, I don't know, it's the early App Store was such a unique time with such a unique situation with like, accessibility for software distribution, and developers had to come up with a way to stand out, and they did that by like dropping the price. So of course like that became the consumer expectation, but I don't know, like
every website that covered apps at that time had a section on which they listed paid apps gone free or apps that have dropped significantly in price, and
those are big traffic.
big part of the conversation.
Part of it is because the majority is free.
Right.
And like the economy of apps is like so throwaway. You download it, you try it, either it sticks or it's gone, right? And you're just like, I'm never going to think about that app again for the rest of my life. And so the concept of like gambling $1 on whether this is going to be something that I actually like or not, or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, I think it just puts it in your mind like, I'm only going to spend $1 if I am certain that this will be a part of my life forever.
Yeah.
I'm going to will this app to my children.
Yeah, exactly. Which is such flawed thinking. I'm definitely not defending it, but I think it's like it's been a part of like iOS and mobile development in general that I think has been unfair to developers since the beginning.
Yeah, no, for sure.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is just like you talked a little bit about it, but like what's the experience of going to these developers who have had their apps fall out of the store for one reason or another? Can you share any stories from talking with them about their apps or how they're feeling about GameClub now or all that?
I mean, the response is pretty much all the same, with one exception being like if I email someone about a game and they are already like 90% of the way finished updating it themselves, then the response is like, oh crap, like where were you 6 months ago? Because I've been working on this so much. But like the response to pretty much everyone is like, okay, wow, this is amazing, because like all these games had their own fan bases of varying levels of popularity, and like these guys still get emails on the regular from people that are like, oh man, I really loved game X, Y, and Z that you made. Like, I'd love it if you can bring them back. Like, I played them when I was a teenager, and like I'd love to show them to my kids now. Or like very kind of like almost like heart-wrenching stories of like, oh, your game was so important to me when I was like 12 years old playing it on an iPod Touch, and like I would just love to revisit it again. And for a lot of these developers, it's just like 100 million% like not worth their time to do that, because like they've pivoted off to like a different job or contract work or things like that. So when I approach them with like, hey, like, let me throw your game in GameClub and we'll do all the work to update it and everything else, they're like, okay, cool, sounds amazing. Like this is a perfect solution, because I would love to have something to respond to these people that email me these crazy stories looking to play these games again. So that's been pretty universal across the board. It's just developers just happy to have their creations playable again.
Can I put a game on your list?
Yeah, please do.
I don't know if we're going to cover that as a section of this show, but this whole time, this game that I used to play has been just circling my brain. It was called Forget Me Not. And it was...
That's actually already being updated. As
it's a dream come true.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a beautiful moment.
That was actually so. That's kind of a funny story I can share. In that, like, the early access community. So we've got people that are ultra hardcore GameClub fans, and so we've got a Discord where they hang out and stuff. And I'm pretty open about like what we're working on and like what we're trying to get and things like that. And when people toss out games, I'm like Forget Me Not's a good example. I was like, dude, I'd love to get that game, but like that guy, the developer, has like fallen off the internet. I'm like, I don't know like really how to get in touch with them. Like, doesn't seem to use Twitter anymore.
On Twitter, but yeah. No,
so
he changed his Twitter handle.
Well, so these guys like the GameClub fans like tweeted at him, and he was just like, oh yeah, sure, love to do that, sounds great. And I just like looped in with email, and like a day later we were working on updating it. Basically, it was like insane.
Yes, that's awesome.
So,
I think what's really interesting about this is like it is sort of a good synergy. It's like where it's a good opportunity for them, but like it's also like kind of a wild opportunity for GameClub to recognize, because like where else in the world are you going to find this like pile of people who are like excited to hand over their IP to somebody else,
right?
Like that doesn't exist elsewhere. Like,
I mean, I think the reason why GameClub is working as well as it is too is because it's like me doing the outreach to these people. Like it would be 1,000,000% different if it was like some sterile biz dev guy that was just like effectively like email cold calling people being like, hey, let me buy your game, or whatever weird deal you would come up with them. Like that just gets ignored, like a lot of,
it would sound like spam or somebody trying to like pull a scam of some kind.
A lot of indie developers like have stuff like straight on their website saying like, don't email me about monetization or retention or like any other stuff like that. Cause we're not interested, So like when I hit these different developers up, they're like, oh, hey, like Eli, you did me a huge solid, like posting about our game or doing that video or whatever else. Like, I totally trust you. And like, yeah, you're going to take care of this. Like it's a pretty crazy synergy of how that's all working out.
Yeah.
And then once the ball gits rolling, like, you see all these other classic games from that era.
Right. And that's what's cool now is we're kind of like hitting what feels like this critical mass of like people being aware of what we're doing, fans being really excited that it's not me like talking people into joining GameClub. It's like developers that are hitting me up and are like, hey, heard about this thing you're doing. Would love to know more. Like, let me know when we can like hop on a call or something like that, which is like, my big fear when I joined GameClub was I was like, man, I'm going to like lose the platform that's TouchArcade. Like, I really hope that I'm still able to like maintain contact with people and all this stuff. So it was a big worry of mine that I was just going to like turn into the weird business guy that was badgering people, and to have people like come to me being like, hey, what you're doing is so cool. Like, I'd love to be a part of it. Like, what can I do to help is really awesome. Like that really makes me feel like we're striking a chord with like all the right people.
That's awesome. So I want to get into talking about some of the games that you guys have picked up. I guess one last thing that I wanted before we move off of talking about sort of GameClub in generalities is like, you guys have been a little bit quiet about like what your ultimate plans are in terms of how this is getting rolled out and I don't know what the business model is and so on. I know some of that stuff is probably still being worked out or isn't ready to be shared. But tell me a little bit about.
He's been waiting to announce it all here on the short game.
We got the scoop.
I mean more along the lines of what can you tell me about like what are next steps for GameClub? Where is this going? Like what does the future look like for all of this?
So right now, so we announced that the way the Game Club is going to work is it's going to be a subscription that you subscribe through iTunes and stuff like that, and that's kind of the way that all these games are going to like keep getting recurring revenue and ongoing support and things like that. We are right now testing that sort of stuff in test markets to try to like figure out the best user flow to kind of like provide the best experience of like, because it's kind of a tricky thing, right? Because offering a bundle of games as a subscription is like something that people don't really know about on the App Store, because it's a really new concept for a lot of mobile consumers. Whereas like the way that most people treat mobile games is, like much like you guys were saying before, in that like they're highly disposable experiences. I mean, like if you look at how games are advertised on like Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it's just like I like just typically absurd advertisement where it's like, oh, if you make it to this level, you're officially a master or something like that, like very kind of like mental junk food sort of stuff. And our one of the challenges that we're working through is like, how do we kind of like short circuit that and kind of teach people like, hey, it doesn't need to be this kind of like junky, ad-packed, free-to-play stuff. Like you could play real deal games on your iPhone, because like we're all old school enough to realize that like this stuff used to be normal, right? But to a lot of the people that are discovering Game Club, it's like, oh my God, like you mean I can play a game that's just like a good game without any like freemium shenanigans or anything like that? That sounds amazing, So it's like, that's kind of like one of our big challenges that we're working through is like how to kind of come up with a user flow that kind of like is still fun and like doesn't make the games feel gross, but still educates people on like what Game Club is and like why it's cool and why they should subscribe and stuff like that, which is kind of a tricky challenge, but we got smart people working on it. So, it'll work out.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the specific games that you guys have either announced or already released through your, through your, what do you call it? Your beta program or?
Yeah, we called it early access just because of like Steam early access seemed like it was the thing that people knew about, but yeah, the beta program, early access, like whatever.
Yeah. Oh, and
same.
we should probably start by saying, like, if folks listening aren't aware, like, you can try some of these games now if you are interested by going through the early access program. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so if you go to GameClub.io, you just like dump your email in to sign up. That tosses you over to a page where you can download, as of this recording, 15 different games via TestFlight. So if you've never used TestFlight before, it's super duper easy. You just download TestFlight from the App Store, which is Apple's thing that facilitates iOS beta testing. And then from there, you just go back to the beta site, which you'll get a link in your email, and you can just go nuts playing all these games. And really all we ask from people is just like, if you come across any bugs or have any thoughts or anything like that, just like let us know how we can improve these games, or like, because one sort of challenging thing with releasing anything on iOS now is that Apple restricts your ability to downgrade your operating system on your phone for security reasons. So it's real tricky for us to, like, say for instance, like test these games on like iOS 11.5 or whatever, So it's been very useful to have just a bunch of people playing these games just on like different weird devices and operating systems that we don't have immediate access to kind of discover that, like, oh, this is super broken on iOS 12.0 or, whatever else. So
it's funny to talk about like going back, because so a lot of us all used to work at the Apple retail stores, and like and like one of the number one like requests and like frustrations people would come and be like, I just want to go back, because every time there'd be like a big iOS change, people would freak out and hate the new stuff. And I've always thought of it, or at least until recently, I'd always thought of it as just like purely like not of like a really worthwhile complaint, because it's like, things change, you just get used to it. But from like a developer standpoint, there's such a value in being able to go back even for testing. So it's just funny to hear that same like problem rephrased in such a logical and reasonable way, rather than someone like storming into a store and being like, I don't like the new colors, and like yelling at me.
Yeah. No, it's a serious issue, particularly because like, Apple's always boasts how many people are running their newest operating system, but with the amount of devices in the wild, like even 10% of people on the old version of iOS is still millions and millions and millions of people,
I used to pay for access to a device lab that was mostly just old iPhones, because otherwise I couldn't have access to see websites on those things, like let alone apps. But I think you basically were paying like $50 a year so I could walk into a room with like 30 old iPhones in it.
Oh wow.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I happen to have my kid's college fund downstairs, which is an old iPhone that still has Flappy Bird on it.
Oh, there you go.
You spoke about how easy it is to get going with GameClub, and I agree completely. It took me like 3 minutes to go to your site, download TestFlight. I'd never done any of that. I've not interacted with TestFlight before. And within, minutes, basically, I had downloaded like every game that you had available and filled up my phone. So it was definitely a very, very easy experience to like dive in and start interacting with your stuff.
Yeah, and cool. Let's talk about some of those games. I think to sort of pick a game to start with, the game that made me realize, oh, these guys are serious, was that you had Hook Champ.
Yeah. Well, that was our first announcement. Like I was like, because we were sort of stressing out as far as like which game we were going to kind of like reveal as the first one, because like I feel like that really sets the scene as far as like what people are going to expect of the rest of them. And I was like, there's nothing more OG classic on the App Store that's been gone for years than Hook Champ. Like it's really hard to think of a better kind of like plant your flag. This is GameClub. This is what we're doing. Than Hook Champ, right?
So for people who missed out on Hook Champ, which, I mean, you can be forgiven if you haven't had an iPhone since, I don't know when that dropped off the store, but it's been a long damn time.
Yeah.
Like
it came out in 2009.
Yeah. So tell us about Hook Champ. Or actually, I don't know, maybe Nate wants to, Nate was so damn excited about Hook Champ.
I just shouted. So it's funny. You're talking about like your top list of games that you would bring back. And I was thinking about my own, and like Hook Champ was for sure number one. And that was for sure what, like the moment I heard about GameClub and how to get involved, I was like, well, hell yeah, I want to go and play Hook Champ again. And I don't know exactly when I first played it. I didn't have an iOS device right out of the first launch, but it was the first game that I played on my iPod Touch. I think was sometime around 2010, where I was like, "Oh, this is a good game, and this is a game worth playing." Right? I've always thought, like, for a long time, I've had this feeling that in video games, one of my favorite mechanics is like a swinging mechanic. We've covered a bunch of games that do that, like Ori, or even like the new Spider-Man. And it dawned on me when I was playing it. I have completed it again via GameClub, which is fantastic. And it dawned on me that Hook Champ might be the reason I've always had this like affinity for like a good, solid swinging mechanic in a game. And it also showed that controls are always just so clunky. Or it's very easy for anything that's like an action game on a phone to feel clunky. There's usually going to be some like clunky D-pad on the screen or whatever. Sure. But this was the first game, and still one of the best to give that sense of like an action game that had controls that made sense and were easy on an iPhone, which is, again, mostly just tapping, right? So if we're talking about what the game is it's just a left to right scroller where instead of running, you are throwing your grappling hook and either hitting the screen or the ceiling or whatever you can, and swinging left to right, collecting coins, avoiding bad guys. It's fantastic.
I think Hook Champ feels like a particularly special game because this was released right around the time where before, like, there's this era in the App Store that, like, I don't know, kind of feels like a BC/AD sort of like switch over in time, right? Where it was like games were very, very basic, sort of like tilt your phone or like tap the screen, or because developers like didn't really know what to make of the lack of like physical buttons and D-pad on the iPhone, right? And Hook Champ was among the crop of the very first games that was like, hey, we can actually make a really kick-ass game on this. Like, we don't need a D-pad and all this stuff. So it's just from an era that just feels really special.
Yeah, that game rules. And if folks aren't aware, it and its sequel are on GameClub.
Yeah, I was really excited when it came out for a very selfish reason, and that was that I knew that we were up to do a Flash game for Toy Story 3, and I thought it would be fun to have Woody swing the cord in the back over like a lasso so he could swing on his cord. But I was looking at all these old Nintendo games for swings. Like, I was having a really hard time explaining the way I wanted the mechanic to work to my boss. And Hook Champ came out in October. I think the pitch was due at the end of the month. And I just remember walking in and being like, look, swings are fun. Woody should swing.
Wow. I'm sorry I can't play your Flash Toy Story game. That actually sounds like it'd be kind of neat.
Yeah.
Well, so the crazy thing about the Flash game world right now is that they're kind of like going through the exact same thing that mobile's experiencing right now.
Yeah.
Like people kind of think that mobile's a unique situation, but really, like, there's so many parallels that I'm beginning to discover with like Flash development, talking to like, because that's been kind of a weird thing when the GameClub message sort of spread out enough that I just have had like random discussions with Flash developers being like, hey, do you know anyone doing this for Flash? Because like I made all these games that were super popular, but like Flash is not existing anymore. And so it's kind of cool.
If you're out there and you have some weird way to revive Flash from the dead.
It just sounds like the next wave of GameClub. Once you've finished
incredibly
iOS.
lucrative.
Once you've done them all.
I pitched it to the engineers. It's like, hey, like, this is happening in Flash, and we could probably scoop up a bunch of really cool stuff that people would recognize. And they were just like, no, not just. I'll talk about this right now.
That's all right. That'll be project number 2 someday.
They're like one backbreaking challenge at a time, please.
Yeah. So there's obviously there's a bunch of games on your list of games that are that you currently have on your early access program, and the Hook Champ games are pretty awesome. I know, Laura, you were excited to talk about Space Miner, which I had never played, but I've been getting into it now.
Oh man, this game's so good.
I adore my Hillbilly Asteroids so much. Space Miner is a charming game. It's got polish. I don't tend to play a ton of shooter games, but this one really caught my heart. I think it's got a real good mix of bite-sized levels, action, challenge. You can level up your spaceship to an absurd amount and just decimate the place. But I think that really it's got a nice blend of a lot of heart and a lot of nonsense, which I was sorely missing because a lot of shooting games take themselves very seriously. So Space Miner, I played to death. I've already, I'm in the bonus levels already in the test flight version, despite moving. But I think Space Miner is one of my favorites. I kind of knew it was going to come only because I think you mentioned it early on, as if you had heard everyone begging you for bringing Space Miner. It was mentioned in an earlier article, like, and yes, Space Miner's on the list. Please stop asking me. Probably like you're sick of people asking for Dungeon Raid in the Discord. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, Dungeon Raid is high on my list. I'm working on it. Don't worry.
I know.
But yeah, no, Space Miner is a super duper favorite of mine. I think it was TouchArcade Game of the Year in 2010 or 11 or whenever it came out. Like, just super, super good game. I always really like games that kind of take a well-known sort of like gameplay formula and just like riff on it like crazy. And like Space Miner really is just kind of asteroids turned up to 11, which is super cool and really awesome to see like what you can do.
Yeah, and it's a game that I missed, back in its day, and I'm having so much fun going back and checking it out for the first time. Like I totally recommend this. Like, I think if folks are jumping into the Game Club list of games that are on early access right now, try Hook Champ. Hook Champ is awesome, but like I think Space Miner maybe holds up even better because it is a little deeper. Maybe not. I don't know. It's probably saying a lot, but like it's a deeper game than it's a deeper game than Hook Champ games.
Yeah,
and
for sure,
it is very funny, and I think the art still looks good even on modern devices. And
it's aged really well, surprisingly so.
Yeah, I had never played it before either, and after hearing after hearing how good it was from Laura, I also downloaded it, and it's been, outside of Hook Champ, it's been the one that I've played the most of from Game Club so far.
I think oddly, the one that I've played the most of is probably Chopper 2.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm actually not 100% sure that I played Chopper 2 on the iPhone. I think I might have played Chopper 1.
Well, Chopper 1 was like unbelievably popular.
Yeah.
Like that was like the first, well, I don't know about the first, but like I remember it being like the first flying shooting action game on the App Store. It like looked really cool and played really cool.
Yeah.
And then like Chopper 2, when it came out, it was one of the first kind of like 2.5D games because Dave Frampton, that is the original developer of that, was just like this crazy like low level C++ wizard that got 3D working on the iPhone when it was like still a rare thing. So Chopper 2, I feel like it hasn't aged quite as well as some of the other games, but it's like such a historical sort of point in like when graphics were starting to get really cool that it's awesome. I
can see why somebody might think it doesn't hold up particularly well, but for me, it really rings a bell because I played a lot of I think Choplifter on the original Macintosh.
Yeah.
And it's basically that, right? And it's a formula that just has always worked for me. And I'm sure there are a dozen clones of this style of gameplay that you can go and download right now, but this one is a good one. And being able to just try it out as part of the early access program, I found myself just suddenly playing a lot of it on my phone. So that's
awesome.
Shane, I think you said you were pretty into sort of Fargoal?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't know. I say I'm pretty into it because it takes a lot of effort to get like into sort of Fargoal. But it's definitely the only one on this list that I've put a good amount of time into. And if you like roguelike type games, it was one that I thought I'd played really well on iOS. When I played it back in the day, I didn't realize that it had like this history of being like a Commodore 64 game.
Oh yeah, it's old as dirt.
Yeah, old as dirt, apparently.
It's older than I am. It
that.
was released in 1982 originally, so
older than me. Holy shit! But yeah, no, it actually played really well on iOS. I remember it. So it has these like swipe controls that just like you can like just sort of swipe and hold and cruise in a direction and swipe into an enemy and just like fight with them. And so that aspect of it, like that it controlled really well on in a genre that was rife with like D-pads or like very specific tap controls where you had to like tap each time you wanted to move your character. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I'm a sucker for a dungeon crawler.
Yeah, what's really cool about Sword of Fargoal is that so it still is the mobile port was still made with the help of Jeff McCord, who is the original creator of Sword of Fargoal back in the day, and like
wow.
That dude is so passionate about this game. It is unbelievable. Like he's the kind of guy that like will just talk your ear off for hours and hours and hours with like the most fascinating stories of like Amiga development and stuff like that. Cause he's just like as old school as it gets with this sort of stuff. And I think the mobile version is kind of like a modern port of like the old game with like modern lighting effects and stuff like that. So I think that is a really good way to jump into roguelikes just in general if you've never played one. And what's cool about it is it has kind of like I think the easy mode is called Squire mode or something like that, where it makes it really kind of difficult to die, which is a cool way to kind of like dip your feet into the roguelike genre too, which is historically kind of like pretty punishing.
Yeah.
Like permadeath.
And what's particularly interesting about this game, I think, is that, like, if anything, the roguelike genre is way more popular today than when or at least more mainstream than when Sword of Fargoal would have originally come out on the iPhone. So, like, it's cool to see that return because, like, I mean, there are other roguelike games on the iPhone, but, like, that is a genre that I think people are still very hungry for.
Well, right. Like, I remember when this first came out, I needed to kind of like get an explainer as to like what a roguelike is and like why people would enjoy something like this. Because like, I downloaded Sword of Fargoal when it first came out and just like, I was like, okay, this dungeon changes every time and I just die. Like, how is this fun to anyone? And then I kind of like understood like what was happening and like what you actually do and how you need to really be careful and strategic about your movements and everything else, and came to really appreciate it. But you're right. Like now, the kind of like super difficult randomized gameplay / dungeon thing is just kind of normal. I mean, like we saw Cadence of Hyrule get released last week, which is like a official Nintendo made Zelda branded randomly generated roguelike thing, which is unbelievable.
Yeah. I also think like anytime you explain to someone what a roguelike is and they've never played it, like the first response is always, and why is this fun?
Yeah.
But like people don't have to ask that anymore because those the elements of the roguelike genre have found their way into everything now. Like they, huge games are stealing bits and pieces from the true old school roguelike genre, and you just find those mechanics everywhere.
Well, I remember, do you guys remember when Spelunky was first released and like the reception of that was like, oh my God, this is new game. And like every time you play it, the levels are random and it's so punishing. When you die, your game is just over. And it's like, yeah, dude, that's called a roguelike.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think procedurally generated has like detached entirely from roguelikes at this point, but it, that is definitely the root, right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Eli, do you have any particular games that you want to call out, either ones that are part of the current crop that people can go and download right now, or ones that you're excited about that are coming along soon?
Well, so what's coming very soon is Legendary Wars, which is one of 3 games in the Legendary Wars trilogy. So Legendary Wars is kind of like this lane-based kind of like battling game. It's extremely difficult to describe it. Like it's one of those things like when you play it and like you see it in motion, you're like, oh, okay, that makes total sense. So Legendary Wars came out and it did pretty well. And what I always really liked about this series of games is that the sequels, instead of just kind of like improving on the game, like also advance time in the game world. So Legendary Wars is kind of like super old medieval battling. And then Monster Wars is the next game, which sort of shifts time around. And then the last one is Stellar Wars, which takes place in like this like futuristic space. So I don't know. I always really like so the movie series like How to Train Your Dragon also sort of does that, where it's like the movies advance in time significantly, which I think is really cool. And so those are something to look forward to. We have Hook Champ, Super Quick Hook, which of course means we're also eventually going to release Hook Worlds. I think that's gonna come out on early access next month.
That's exciting. I played both of the. I played Hook Champ and Super Quick Hook, but I'm pretty sure I haven't played Hook Worlds, so I'm excited to get some new stuff.
Hook Worlds is really good. And then we're full of surprises. I don't know how much I should really give away of our release cycle because so much of it is in flux, but needless to say, like we're actively chasing after like the best games of the past that just got neglected or fell off the app store or whatever else, and bringing them back to life. And I think of what we have, there's going to be a lot of stuff that people are going to be really, really excited to see again on their iPhone. So.
I mean, I'm already just like hyped that you said that Forget Me Not is coming back.
Yeah.
Shane has just been vibrating since he said that.
I know I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I tweeted at the developers of the iBlast Moki games. And
that's coming too.
Yes, they seemed receptive, and I was very excited about that. Those iBlast Moki games were like absolutely my jam when the iPad was brand new. Like I think, oh man, those were some good puzzle games. So
yeah, those are outstanding. Those are coming soon. I'm not sure where those are in our pipeline right now, but that's a game we're working on.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like there are just these games where like, maybe I haven't played it in a while, but I think, oh yeah, that was a game I loved, and I've got a new iPad. What should I play on it? And I went and looked for that, and it was gone from the App Store, and I was heartbroken. And
huge bummer
when that happens to you. And so it's so exciting to hear these things coming back.
Yeah.
So here at the end of the show, we have a segment we like to call "What's Making You Happy This Week," and Eli, you can probably guess what that is all about. So, do you want to go first? Do you have anything that's making you happy this week that you want to shout out?
Yeah, sure. So I recently, well, not recently, I guess like earlier this year, got turned on to this podcast called Doughboys, which is a couple of like comedy writers that review fast food restaurants as their thing. And I was like, all right, this is pretty amazing, because it's like, I don't know, it's like listening to two people that seem like they're just like best friends, but still kind of hate each other and just like give each other loads of shit while they're reviewing fast food chains, which I don't know, it's a crazy premise, but it works really well. And like, I've since discovered that this podcast is like one of many podcasts in this like weird spin-off universe of what originally started as like a comedy sketch group or something like that. So it's made me really happy this week is, well, I guess like the last couple of weeks is sort of discovering that like this brand of humor is not just limited to this one podcast that I'm totally caught up on, but is actually this entire like ecosystem of other podcasts and other weirdos on Twitter and stuff like that all share the same kind of like really zany sense of humor. So that's that discovery has been what's making me happy. But definitely check out the Doughboys podcast. It's really good. I've been to 3 live recordings now.
Wow.
Which is pretty it kind of officially makes me a podcast roadie for them.
Yeah, you're a super fan. That's I will have a link in the show notes, and I'm very much looking forward to checking that out, because it's always nice to have a comedy podcast with a back catalog that you haven't gone back and listened to yet crop up.
Yeah, it's always kind of tricky though to get people started on a comedy podcast, because like so much of it is like getting like the references and inside jokes and stuff, and I'm always concerned when you recommend Doughboys to people, you listen to it, be like, I don't know, these guys are just kind of like mean to each other. Then they review a fast food place.
Yeah, I think I listened to like 4 other Headgun podcasts, so I should probably add Doughboys if I'm already in. Like, I've already listened to Punch Off the Jam and Overdue and all kinds of stuff off them.
Would you start at the beginning, or do you have a place you'd recommend?
Yeah, perfect. I would just jump in and like, I don't know, just stick with it for a few weeks and kind of like get to know the hosts, and I promise you'll really like it. But if you're not into comedy podcasts, I have a alternate recommendation that also makes me very happy, which is called the film Reroll. Have you guys heard of this?
I have, yes. I'm a big RPG lover.
Oh my god! So like, it's always hard for me to kind of get into a Dungeons and Dragons game as an adult, because it's like everyone that I would play with like has kids or is married or has a job, and like getting 6 people together around a table, like as you know, hosting
impossible.
a podcast with multiple people is super challenging, right? So I've kind of like gotten my Dungeons and Dragons fix by like listening to different Dungeons and Dragons podcasts, I guess. But the problem with some of the more, well, like most of the more popular ones is that like they do these campaigns that span like hundreds of hours of podcast time, right? And it's just like, man, I don't really like, this is just too much. You know, it's like when someone recommends a TV show and it's got like 13 seasons.
Game of Thrones season 7 is the really good one. You should just start at the beginning and it'll only take you 3 years.
Lies.
Yeah, just commit 100 hours to this thing of media. You have the time for that.
Whereas like Film Reroll, like the way they do is they treat movies as campaigns. So it's like everything's a very like bite-sized, like maybe like 1 to 3 episode thing that you can just kind of like scroll through the feed and be like, oh, Aladdin. I like the movie Aladdin. Like, let me see like what crazy stuff happens when they try to like turn Aladdin into a GURPS role-playing game.
Oh, that rules.
Which like, and it's amazing because like, you know, you never really think of like how many things happen in movies are like complete chance and stuff. And like what would happen if like a very important part of a movie, like the main character, like critically failed, because like that happens all the time on their podcast. So that's my secondary recommendation.
That rules. I will have links to both of those.
It's so good. Film Reroll is so good. It's silly.
Well, since you brought up something RPG related, I will share mine, which is also RPG related. And this is just a little tiny web app that I have kind of fallen in love with and wind up spending way more time with than it really warrants in my actual life. It's on itch.io. It's called Watabu's Medieval Fantasy City Generator. This is just a tiny web app that creates city maps for small medieval fantasy towns according to your specificity, according to any of your various specific needs. And you can set. It's been under like very active mysteriously active development for about the last couple of years, and I've watched it for a while, and it's just at a point where I'm like, this thing, I can't believe it's still free.
This is cool, and it works on your phone. I just pulled it up. Like,
wow!
Yes, that's actually something worth calling out about it. It works surprisingly well on a mobile device. You can customize the size of your city and all these various different attributes of it, including things like, is there a castle or a plaza? Does it have a temple? Does it have city walls? Does it have shanty towns? Is it along a coast or a river? And there's a lot of visual customizations you can do as well. It has become something that is just an incredibly fun toy to play with. And then as someone who runs D&D games and occasionally has to like, you know, make up a town and, you know, would enjoy the ability to, you know, I really like the ability to like customize and then print it off. You can even, if you want to create some very custom terrain, warp the mesh on which the town is drawn in a really satisfying and fun way so that you can kind of squash and stretch the various districts and areas of your town.
This is fun just to fiddle with, like, even if you're not doing anything.
Fun. Yeah. The reason I want to bring it up now is that they've added this feature that, like, to me, makes it, I feel like this thing finally should hit 1.0, which is the ability to label and name all the districts in the town and do the classic RPG map thing where it puts little numbered circles onto the map. But yeah, no, I would encourage anybody to go to watabu.itch.io and just tinker with this thing. Even if you're not into RPGs, it's just fun.
For those of you who can't spell Watabu, I will have a link to that in the show notes. That sounds, I've played around with that just a little bit, and it does rule. But I think actually for me, as a totally, Shane's the biggest DM of the group here, but I have DM'd a little bit. I think for me, probably the most valuable thing is just a thing that asks you questions about the fantasy town that you're creating. Like, does it have a temple? Like, that's a question that I should ask myself if I'm coming up with a fantasy town. And I mean, awesome to have a tool that helps you then create an actual map you can use in your game. So the thing that's making me happy this week is not RPG related. It's more of just a little video game hardware
transition.
thing. Yes. I'm a big. I mean, you could use it to play certain types of RPGs, I suppose. So there's that stretch. It's a video game controller thing. So I want to recommend the 8-bit Do or 8-bit Do. I'm not sure how they actually pronounce there. I think it's Do. Anyway, the 8-bit Do mod kits for old school controllers. So if you're not familiar with 8-bit Do, they are a company that makes retro-styled controllers for modern systems. So you can get a controller that's shaped like a SNES pad, for example, that you can use with your Switch, that kind of thing. But they also make these mod kits that you can install into actual older controllers, or in most cases, the sort of quote-unquote classic controller equivalent of those older controllers. And I've got 3 of these things, and I just got one this week that I'm particularly happy with. And so I wanted to call them out because I think they're really neat. So if you're a Switch player in particular, I think these things are great. They make these kits where you just take a controller. They have options for the NES, the SNES, and the PlayStation and 6-button Genesis controllers. And you unscrew them, and you take out the existing board that goes inside that, and you take out the wire, and you replace it with the PCB that they provide you that includes a battery and a Bluetooth chip. And then you screw it all back together, and then you have a controller that is 100% feels like the real thing. It's got all the original plastic and rubber of your original controller from the PlayStation, the SNES, etc. But modern Bluetooth internals that work with Windows as an X input device, like a Xbox controller. They work with Mac, and when you connect them to your Mac, they emulate a DualShock 4 and work well with pretty much anything that you want to connect them with. They work great on Android, where they work as a direct input device. I don't have so much use for that, but they also work on the Nintendo Switch, where they pretend to be a Pro controller. Wow. And you can pair them wirelessly and use them with pretty much any game. And I'm happiest so far with the one for the PlayStation. I had the PlayStation Classic, which is sitting collecting dust on my shelf because that thing wasn't particularly great. But they made a mod kit for the controllers that come with that. Pro tip there, if you don't want the PlayStation Classic, and you probably don't, it's not that great, you can actually pick up the controllers that were intended for the PlayStation Classic for $9.99 at Target. And then you can get this $20 board to fit into them from 8-bit Do, and you get a $30 really nice classic PlayStation controller, the non-DualShock one, the D-pad only one without the analog sticks, that you can use with your Switch. And you might say, why would I want that when I have a Switch controller? Well,
why would I want that, Raygan?
Yes,
Raygan, why would I want that?
Well, the D-pad on this thing is great. I mean, I've been playing Cadence of Hyrule this week, and we really, really want an accurate D-pad for something like that. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the D-pad on the original PlayStation controller is one of my favorites ever, the segmented D-pad, but it still has the rocking thing, not like the D-pad on the, or quote unquote D-pad on the Switch controllers, where the Joy-Cons, where it's actually separate buttons, like they're separated, so it's easy to tell which way you're pressing, but they do have the pivot. They have the sort of rocking motion that you get with an actual D-pad. Anyway, really, really great. Really responsive. The lag is extremely minimal. I highly recommend these things, and they're very easy to install. They're quote unquote a mod, but it's like the easiest mod you'll ever do. They send you the screwdriver in the box. You literally don't need to have your own tools. There's no soldering. It's just unscrew one thing, put another thing in its place. So that's what's making me happy this week. I highly recommend the 8-bit Do controller mod kits. I'm crossing my fingers that we'll be able to use them on iOS here in the future, because they do update
that'd
them
be nice
with new firmware, and now that Apple is starting to allow more controller options there.
If you want to fix the D-pad on your Switch, you can buy replacement plastic housings for the actual Joy-Cons. I got this done a while ago on mine. I actually just bought a pair that someone already modded on eBay for like $20 more than the cost of Joy-Cons, and it has an actual real deal D-pad on it. And everyone that sees it is like, oh my God, where did you get that? I didn't even know it, because the D-pad's terrible on the Switch, right?
So, yeah, it really is. Mm-hmm. It seems like a kind of a tricky mod, though, because there's a lot of little tiny parts in those Joy-Cons.
Yeah, that's why I had someone else do it, because I was like, I don't want to mess this up. I'll just pay the premium and have some eBay guy do it.
Yeah. But I mean, as compared to other handhelds or something, at least it's just a detachable Joy-Con. Like if you fuck it up, you go buy another one, which is one of the great things about the Switch. So I love those. That's really cool. Laura, what's making you happy this week?
So I am on a road trip, waiting for my stuff to move to New York, which I don't think I've actually said that I'm moving to New York, but I am. So I went to Columbus this weekend to visit my friend Tim. And Columbus had two things going on, the Pride Parade and the Origins Board Game Festival. And they've actually coordinated this so they happen on the same weekend. It's very cool. But I will say it's a bit of a weird thing to go from outside. It's like every color of the rainbow. Inside, there's a lot of backpacks and beige. I love my people on both sides. But I will say that I loved a lot of the games I played, but I want to give a shout out to Letter Jam. It's by the studio that put out Codenames, and it's a cooperative word game, which is a little bit like Hanabi, the fireworks game that I've talked about in the past, in that everybody gets a word chosen for them by someone else. You pick out the letters, spell it out, hand it to them, and then they put up the first letter in their word, and you can see everybody else's letter, but not yours. And then you kind of have to try to anagram. It's kind of Hanabi plus Scrabble. You look around, you say, I can make a 6-letter word using 3 players and 2 dummies, or I can make a 7-letter word using a wild card, etc. And they decide who wants to go. And you don't say the word, you put little numbered chips, 1 to however many letters out. So this is the first letter, this is the second one, this is the third. So everyone is working with different amounts of information. And if you can figure out what your letter is, you put it down and pick up the next. And the goal is to, by the time you run out of rounds, to have everybody know. You don't have to know the word you're spelling, but you need to put the cards in front of you in the order that will make a word. Some of the more inventive words that got thrown out during the game, I think, were like kebabs, and people got really confused if kebabs had an E or an A, or if it was a B, if it was an A or an O. Someone spelled the word ribbits, but one person didn't know that there were 2 B's in it because they had the B, and they just sat there staring for like 10 minutes. So it's really fun because it's trying to balance. I like hidden information games, and I love a cooperative game. Especially ones that everyone has to participate or there's a penalty. So I could definitely see this, probably not after 2 beers, but maybe after 1, being a very popular game at game night. It comes out in Gen Con in August. We were kind of playtesting.
That's awesome. What's the board game convention called again?
It's called Origins, yearly in Columbus.
Well, that's really cool. I'll keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we can check it out once it's actually printed and available. Nate, what's making you happy this week?
Yeah, so we've mentioned it a couple times, but in 2 ways, I have been flung back into the world of Hyrule this last week.
Man.
I've been very, very excited about it. So first of all, Cadence of Hyrule, a combination I never knew I needed, but I have it now, and it's fantastic. And also, for Father's Day, Molly got me Breath of the Wild. Now, we got it when it came out, like launch day, but at that point, I didn't have a Switch, so we played it on Wii U and like obsessed over it just like everyone else did. If you go back and listen to an episode of the short game during that time, every episode was yeah, this cool short game we're playing, it's worthwhile, it's worth your time, da, 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 da. Can we talk about Breath of the Wild, right? So it's been since then that I'd played it, and I had not played it on the Switch, and I'd always talked about wanting to play it again on the hard mode or master mode, as that they released as a DLC. So Molly got it for me, and I've been playing that. And it's don't worry, guys, still a great game. Turns out, Breath of the Wild, still fun, and it's been just enough distance where I'm remembering some things, like big picture locations of important shrines and things like that, where it's like actually helpful to know it and not have to look all over the world for it, but not enough where I'm going into every single shrine and being like, oh, I know how to do this, right? And master mode is challenging, but it's been fun.
So what's specifically different about master mode?
Yeah, if you're familiar with the leveling system of the bad guy, the bad guys in the game, the monsters, everything starts the game up a level, And then they also have a regeneration factor to them. So if you remember, like, a lot of the strategy, at least what I would employ, was like you end up kiting like a huge swarm of like bokoblins or whatever, and you're just like chipping away until one dies and another dies and another dies. Well, they regenerate now. So you kind of got to go. You either got to go in hard and fast and like get the kill, or you have to avoid them entirely. So like I never like Breath of the Wild was challenging in some ways, but in a lot of ways, especially after that initial sort of get over the hump, get your weapons, and sort of understand the game, it generally became pretty easy, right? It was more about exploration and things like that. On Master Mode, it's more, and I'm barely into it, but my early experiences are like I have to avoid combat more than I initiate it, and that's actually made it more interesting.
Huh.
So it's been a little more tedious at times because like there's like a single bokoblin that's in front of the Temple of Time at the beginning of the game. And I'm like, oh yeah, this guy. And it killed me like 4 times before I was like, okay, all right. I need to not fight it. I have to sneak around it, get to the chest and get away, So it turns the game a little bit more stealthy. I don't know. It makes the stakes a lot higher. It also makes it it feels a little like from a storytelling standpoint, it feels like it makes a little more sense. Like you enter into the world and it like everything will kill you until you start to actually get some better weapons, get some more hearts and whatnot. So I don't know. I might be back like a month from now and be like, okay, it's just stupid, annoying, hard. It's not worth it. But early, the like stealth element was something that you never had to bother with in the normal game, and I've been enjoying that. So it makes food and like, it's actually worthwhile to eat like a defense plus food before you go into a fight with a camp, because otherwise it's your one hit kill, So that's been the biggest difference so far that I've noticed is the monsters are harder. There's also more monsters. They have these like camps where they're on like balloon platforms all over the place, which they will their range of vision is increased, so they see you from a lot further away. And they just like go up in the air and start firing elemental arrows at you, which is terrifying, but also it's very satisfying because all you have to do is shoot out 1 or 2 of the balloons and the whole thing falls over and they fall in and die. But it just adds like, they're just kind of all over the place. So you're constantly having to deal with like being shot at. So it's been fun. Between that and Cadence of Hyrule, which is a very, very different and also very satisfying experience. I've been playing a lot of Zelda related stuff this past week, and that's always
awesome.
going to make me happy. Yeah.
I'm so excited about the sequel. I mean, it's just been teased, but like, that was a good teaser, guys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
It'll be like another 2 years before that's out, though, right?
That's all right.
Probably.
Just to know.
That's
just
fine.
to know that.
I mean, we've got a lot of Zelda. If you want to play Zelda, like we just got Cadence of Hyrule, and we've got the remake of what's the Game Boy one?
Link's Awakening.
Link's Awakening.
Coming
thank you.
Very soon.
Yeah. So like there's no shortage of Zelda right now, and so it give you something to do while you're waiting for that sequel to eventually come out someday. That's very exciting. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me for this episode of The Short Game. Thank you specifically, Eli, for coming on and sharing with us about GameClub. I mean, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and I'm just I can't wait to see what other games you guys arrange to bring out, and and I'm really looking forward to seeing you launch as a like an actual subscription, because it's exactly the kind of business model I've been hoping for this kind of thing. So just really, really exciting. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Do you have any, I mean, obviously GameClub is the thing you probably want to plug. Do you have anything you want to tell people how do you want people to find you, find GameClub, and anything else you want to point them towards?
Just GameClub.io is the place to go. We're also GameClub on Twitter. You can join the GameClub Discord at discord.gg/GameClub. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Hodapp, my last name, HODAPP. Or you can probably just type my name into Google and find all sorts of horrible things about me, as well as my Twitter. So,
absolutely. And of course, listeners, you can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find a contact form. That's a great way to let us know what short games you have played or are interested in that are upcoming. We always love to hear from our listeners about that sort of thing, because it helps us plan the show. Of course, you can also reach us on by email, info@theshortgame.net, on Twitter @_shortgame. And you can find me on Twitter @RayganK. That's RayGanK. Shane, where can people find you?
Also on Twitter @8bitshane.
Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter, Nate @NateSTL.
And Laura, where can people find you?
@Laura J. Nash.
And listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.